If the future of all quote-unquote Xbox hardware is Windows devices, including in the living room, do you think it's likely that PlayStation alters its strategy with regards to porting first-party games to PC? And what would this most likely entail? Could they lengthen the gap between releasing on console and PC again, create their own PC storefront/launcher that gives them more control over which devices their games run on, or perhaps withdraw from publishing on PC altogether? Seems hard to imagine Sony being comfortable with other living room consoles having access to their titles when exclusivity has always been a key part of their success. Alex, this is kind of I don't know. I think this kind of thinking is probably reductive, because ultimately the reason Sony is putting out those games on PC is because they want to sell more games. So the concept of locking out from an Xbox console possibly makes sense because there aren't that many of them. But when you start introducing limits on what PCs you can play your PC game on, I imagine the backlash from that is going to be extraordinarily large. And I'm not sure the extent to which it could even be enforced if an Xbox PC is an open PC.
Yeah, I think they just want money. I don't think they're going to just like keep slowly expanding whatever their PC initiative is in the direction that they feel comfortable with based upon changing market conditions. And as soon as they start seeing, like you mentioned earlier in this episode, Rich, that the console model is maybe in its waning days in terms of popularity and how much market growth it'll see. And as soon as Sony starts seeing that with their internal metrics, they're going to start doing anything they need to do to make sure that they keep the bottom line intact, and whatever that means. And in this case, I don't think Sony would do something like I don't think they're going to also launch their own store because they've seen such success on Steam, right? They've even recently gotten rid of their policy that prevented people from buying and playing games on Steam from certain regions. They got rid of, for the most part, all the necessary you need to sign into PSN stuff.
Yep.
You know, they tried to edge. They tried to say like, oh, they thought they were more popular than they were, and then the backlash proved that they weren't. And I think that means that the market just on PC views Sony games as just any other publisher, not necessarily something special. And that has like maybe in the beginning it was novel that those exclusives were coming, but it's not that thing anymore. And so I think they have to actually have a more generous approach to PC than they possibly would have had 5 or 6 years ago. And I think that's going to just keep going on into the future for the foreseeable future, because what would be the point of preventing some device arbitrarily from playing your game? They're buying the game anyway, right? Don't you want that? Like, so, and if it's digital, they're not spending money on a disc that they have to recoup then, you know, all the middlemen are gone for the most part at that point. It's just the store fee. And I think that's what Sony doesn't have a problem with at the moment.
Right. Yeah. I mean, ultimately, the point of the PC is it's an open platform. And if Sony decides to limit which devices their games run on, there's these things called mods. They'll just be patched, you know, unless there's like some massive collaboration with a DRM merchant. I just can't see it happening.
Yeah, the new version of Denuvo or Star Force or whatever.
Oliver, what do you think?
I honestly am kind of the mind that Sony will probably think at least a little bit different about their exclusives running on an Xbox now as opposed to just a PC. I can imagine it affecting their timing for PC releases at the very least, because if I was Sony, I would feel pretty reticent to just give my games to what's perceived as a major console competitor a year after launch, 2 years after launch. But I suppose that really depends on a number of factors. I think it would depend on the extent to which people perceive the next Xbox offering as a full-fledged console, right? Also, the extent to which I perceive that console as a threat. Like right now, I think Xbox Series is estimated at like 28 million, 30 million sold units. PS5 at something like 80 million.
Oh my God.
The next generation Xbox, are you going to presume that it continues that trajectory and the Xbox sells an even lower fraction of PlayStation units? I don't know. It's at some point, you know, to speak frankly, I don't think Sony is viewing that necessarily as a competitor in their console space. I think they just see it as a couple extra units sold, right? So that's a factor as well. But I also tend to think that even though like some of Sony's titles on PC, they don't sell tremendously well. Obviously, the initial round of titles sold a little bit better. God of War 1 sold a little bit better. Or, well, God of War 1. God of War 2018 sold a little bit better. But I also perceive that if you are someone who's really interested in those Sony first-party titles, as so many PlayStation players are, if you thought, I could buy this Xbox, get those games a year or two later, still have a console-like experience, would that maybe pull you away from Sony in a way that a PC didn't before? I think that's certainly what Microsoft will be trying to do with their next generation console offering. So I could see that changing Sony's plans, even if I don't think Sony will stop shipping games on PC at all, but I could certainly see them saying, Nixies, hold off on Spider-Man 4 or whatever. Let's just, Spider-Man 3, whatever, right? Let's just hold off on that for a little bit. I could see that being realistic.
I think the problem with that strategy is that you actually reduce your PC sales more generally by doing that. I don't think it's a good idea strategically.
I guess it depends on how many units are you moving on PC, right? Because like some of these games have not sold many units. That's the kind of key issue, right?
Yeah, I think that, I understand like both perspectives here, because they would maybe want a little bit of protection if they saw it as a threat, but at the same point, all these like super late releases or those releases that have quality issues, they just tank the sales. Like at some point, no one cares anymore about the game, because a lot of the big uptake in big AAA game sales is due to the advertising that comes out alongside them. And if you miss like this huge advertising period because you're 1.5 to 2 years late, you're spending again on advertising maybe to get those sales up again. Yeah, it all seems like a bad thing to do.
Or 5 years late.
in that case, like right.
Last of Us,
When you start posing questions like this, it opens up a lot of other what ifs. I would suggest that, if Sony is making a PlayStation handheld, Valve with whatever their next generation handheld is going to be is probably going to be more of a threat. So, and thus far, of course, Sony has actually embraced the Steam Deck. So, at what point do you actually reclass another device as a competing device? It's a bit of a tricky one, I think. I just think ultimately the way forward for Xbox is being laid out before our eyes, which is to say that it's about taking that existing user base, that all of those however many monthly active users, and kind of like giving them options as to where they want to go next. Do they want a console? They'll get a console. Do they want a handheld? They'll get a handheld. Do they want to actually just tap into the PC ecosystem and continually upgrade? So I think that obviously we're probably looking at the last proper console coming in the 10th generation, and then from there it's just going to be this massive diversification of devices, and I don't think Sony can really strategize against that. It will effectively just be PC. Whether they appear on the Xbox store or not is going to be up for debate. But, Microsoft has said, well, you can buy these games wherever you want. We don't really care. So, it's going to be a bit of a step change in how the market is going to be viewed and the extent to which Sony and Microsoft are actually sort of direct competitors anymore. Certainly an interesting thought, though.